Commander Hyun stood frozen in front of the massive holographic screen aboard his reconnaissance ship. The image before him showed a beautiful blue and green planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. But something was very wrong with what his instruments were telling him. The planet sat in what the Zephyrian Empire called the Dead Zone, a boring outer section of this spiral galaxy where nothing interesting ever happened. For thousands of years, their scouts had marked this area as empty of intelligent life. Yet now, bright pulses of electromagnetic energy were shooting out from this world like a beacon screaming across the cosmos. Lieutenant Nari, his most trusted science officer, wiped sweat from her blue-scaled forehead as she recalibrated their most sensitive equipment. Her 6 arms moved quickly across the control panels, double and triple-checking readings that seemed impossible. "Commander, I've run the analysis 17 times now," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The energy signatures are definitely coming from an intelligent species. But, sir, the timeline doesn't make sense." Hyun's insect-like mandibles clicked together rapidly, a nervous habit he'd developed over his 4 decades of military service. He'd explored hundreds of worlds and catalogued dozens of alien civilizations. He knew the standard pattern of development that every species followed. First came fire and basic tools that usually took about 50,000 rotations around their star. Then agriculture and simple machines took another 100,000 rotations. The discovery of electricity and basic chemistry required at least 200,000 more rotations. Most species needed a full 1,000,000 rotations just to figure out how to leave their planet's surface. But these creatures, these humans, as their radio transmissions called themselves, had somehow skipped millions of years of normal development. The evidence was undeniable. Their electromagnetic signatures showed they had mastered nuclear fission, splitting atoms to create enormous amounts of energy. Their orbital mechanics indicated they were already launching primitive spacecraft beyond their homeworld. "Lieutenant, how long do our calculations suggest this species has been technologically active?" Hyun asked, though he dreaded the answer. Nari's scales turned a darker shade of blue, indicating extreme stress. "Sir, based on their radio transmissions and energy output patterns, we estimate they achieved basic industrial technology less than 500 rotations ago. Nuclear technology appeared only about 80 rotations ago, and their first spacecraft—" She paused, checking her readings again. "Their first spacecraft launched just 67 rotations ago." The silence on the bridge was deafening. Every member of Hyun's crew had stopped their work to listen. In the cosmic scale of time, 67 rotations was like a single heartbeat. Most species took longer than that, just to figure out how to make metal tools. Hyun walked closer to the display, studying the planet's surface. City lights covered entire continents, forming web-like patterns that pulsed with activity. Massive structures reached toward the sky, and their sensors detected thousands of flying vehicles moving through the atmosphere. This wasn't just intelligence, this was a thriving, rapidly expanding civilization. "Sir, there's something else," Nari said quietly. "Their entertainment transmissions show an unusual pattern. These humans seem to spend a lot of time thinking about war, conflict, and defeating superior alien forces." A chill ran down Hyun's spine. The Empire had encountered aggressive species before, but never one that developed this quickly. Most civilizations were peaceful by the time they achieved spaceflight, having learned that cooperation was necessary for survival. But these humans appeared to have carried their violent tendencies with them to the stars. "Begin deep analysis protocols immediately," Hyun ordered. "I want to know everything about these creatures, their biology, their psychology, their technology, and most importantly, their intentions. Scan every transmission, every energy signature, every piece of debris in their orbital space." As his crew rushed to obey, Hyun stared at the innocent-looking blue world that had just changed everything. In 40 years of service, he'd never encountered anything that made his survival instinct scream this loudly. These humans represented something entirely new in galactic history, a species that could potentially challenge the Empire itself. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled unopposed for 10,000 years, conquering or absorbing every civilization they encountered. But those civilizations had been predictable, following the standard patterns of development. These humans were different. They were an anomaly that could reshape the entire balance of power in the galaxy. "Prepare the quantum communication array," Hyun commanded. "The Imperial Council needs to know about this immediately, and Lieutenant Nari, classify this information at the highest security level. If word of this discovery leaks before the Empire decides how to respond, it could cause panic across our entire civilization." As the message prepared to travel instantly across thousands of light years to the Empire's capital, Hyun took one last look at Earth. Somehow, he knew that this small blue planet would soon become the most important world in the galaxy. Dr. Minho sat in his laboratory, deep beneath the surface of the Empire's capital world, surrounded by holographic displays showing thousands of intercepted human transmissions. For 3 days straight, he had been analyzing everything the reconnaissance fleet had gathered from Earth: radio signals, television broadcasts, internet communications, and digital entertainment. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The first thing that struck him was how much humans loved stories about war. Their entertainment was filled with tales of conflict, battles, and struggles against impossible odds. But it wasn't just mindless violence. These stories showed something far more disturbing. They showed a species that refused to give up, no matter how hopeless the situation became. Minho pulled up a human film called Independence Day and watched in fascination as the story unfolded. In the movie, massive alien ships arrived at Earth, with technology far superior to anything humans possessed. The aliens easily destroyed major cities and seemed unstoppable. But instead of surrendering, the humans fought back with desperate creativity. They found weaknesses in the alien technology, united their entire planet, and somehow managed to defeat their supposedly superior enemies. "This is just fiction," Minho muttered to himself. "But the pattern is everywhere." He switched to another human story called Ender's Game, then another called Stargate, then dozens more. Every single story showed the same theme: humans facing overwhelming alien forces and finding ways to win through determination, cleverness, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. But the entertainment was just the beginning. Minho began studying human history and found the same patterns in their real wars and conflicts. When faced with superior enemies, humans didn't surrender. They adapted, they learned, they found new ways to fight. Sometimes they lost battles, but they never seemed to lose the war completely. The weapons analysis was even more concerning. Humans had taken every peaceful technology and turned it into something dangerous. They had discovered nuclear fission, the same process that powered stars, and immediately used it to create weapons that could destroy entire cities. Their rockets, originally designed for space exploration, could easily be converted into long-range missiles. Even their agricultural chemicals could be weaponized. "They weaponize everything," Minho said aloud as he prepared his report for the Imperial Council. He activated the quantum communication link that would carry his voice instantly across the galaxy to the Empire's ruling body. The holographic images of the 12 council members appeared before him, their alien faces showing various degrees of concern and curiosity. Councillor Jiwon, a tall insectoid creature with compound eyes, leaned forward from her crystal throne. "Dr. Minho, present your assessment of this human species," she commanded. Minho took a deep breath and began. "Honored councillors, these humans represent a threat unlike anything we have encountered in our 10,000 years of galactic dominance. Their entertainment broadcasts alone paint a picture of a species obsessed with conflict, yet capable of remarkable cooperation when threatened." He displayed several human weapons on the holographic projector. They weaponize everything they touch. Their children play with toys that shoot projectiles. They have turned peaceful atomic energy into city-destroying bombs. Their transportation vehicles are designed to also serve as military equipment. Even their kitchen utensils could be used as weapons. Councillor Jiwon's mandibles clicked impatiently. "Many species are warlike, Doctor. What makes these humans special?" "They're fiction, Councillor," Minho replied, pulling up clips from dozens of human movies and television shows. "They fantasize constantly about defeating superior alien forces, not just surviving contact with advanced civilizations, but actually winning against them. This isn't just entertainment, it's mental preparation. The council members stirred uneasily as they watched humans on screen defeating various fictional alien invaders through creativity, determination, and technological adaptation. Furthermore, Minho continued, their development speed is unprecedented. They achieved nuclear technology in less than 100 rotations. They went from first flight to landing on their moon in just 66 rotations. At this rate of advancement, they will have interstellar capability within a few centuries. Councillor Jiwon leaned back in her throne, her expression grave. Threat assessment, Doctor? Minho's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. If left unchecked, they will be knocking on our borders within a few centuries. They are already launching primitive vessels toward their neighboring worlds. But more importantly, they are the first species we have encountered that actively prepares for conflict with superior alien civilizations. Every other species we have conquered was surprised by our arrival. These humans have been imagining and preparing for us for decades. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in millennia, the Zephyrian Empire faced a species that might actually pose a real threat to their dominance. The massive Imperial Council chamber had never seen such chaos in over 1,000 years. 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat around a circular table made from crystallized starlight, their voices rising in heated argument. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension as each councillor presented their vision for humanity's fate. Councillor Do-hyun, a massive reptilian creature with scales that glowed red when he was angry, slammed his clawed fist on the table. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. "We must act immediately," he roared. "These humans are a plague that will spread across the galaxy if we don't stop them now. I say we sterilize their entire planet before they become too dangerous." His proposal sent shockwaves through the chamber. Several councillors recoiled in horror, while others nodded grimly in agreement. The Empire had only used complete planetary sterilization 3 times in their entire history, and each time it had been against species that posed existential threats to galactic stability. "Think about what you're suggesting," countered Councillor Yunji, her crystalline form shimmering with agitation. "We would be destroying an entire civilization, billions of unique individuals with their own hopes, dreams, and potential contributions to galactic society. This goes against everything the Empire claims to stand for." Yunji stood up from her seat, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Instead of destruction, I propose careful monitoring and gradual integration. We bring them into the Empire slowly, over several centuries. We guide their development, channel their aggressive tendencies into productive pursuits, and eventually make them valuable citizens of our civilization." "Valuable citizens?" Do-hyun laughed bitterly. "Did you not hear Dr. Minho's report? These creatures weaponize everything they touch. Their children play war games. Their entertainment celebrates defeating superior forces. You want to invite that chaos into our ordered society." The debate raged on for hours. Some councillors suggested enslaving humanity, turning them into a warrior caste to fight the Empire's battles. Others proposed surrounding their solar system with an impenetrable barrier, trapping them forever on their home world. A few even suggested attempting to communicate and negotiate with them as equals, a proposal that was quickly shouted down by the more traditional members. As the arguments grew more heated, the chamber's ancient ventilation systems struggled to clear the air of the various pheromones and chemical signals released by agitated councillors. The smell of fear, anger, and uncertainty filled the room like a toxic cloud. Finally, Elder Councillor Wonho raised his trembling hand for silence. At over 3,000 years old, he was the oldest living member of the Imperial Council and had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. His voice, though weak with age, carried the weight of ultimate authority. "There is precedent for this situation," he wheezed, his ancient vocal cords barely producing sound. "The protocol of final warning. We have used it before when facing species of uncertain intent." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the youngest councillors had heard whispered stories about the protocol of final warning, though none had ever seen it implemented. Wonho continued, his milky eyes staring into the distance as if seeing ghosts from the Empire's past. "We offer The species' one chance for compliance. A single ultimatum delivered with overwhelming show of force. They surrender completely and accept integration into the Empire, or... He made a slow cutting gesture across his withered throat. Councillor Jiwon, who had been silent throughout most of the debate, finally spoke up. Elder Wonho, that protocol hasn't been used in 3 millennia. The galaxy has changed since then. These humans might not respond the way ancient species did. A thin smile crossed Wonho's ancient features. That protocol hasn't been used in 3 millennia because it has never failed, he replied. Every single species that received a final warning chose submission over destruction. No intelligent civilization has ever been foolish enough to ignore a direct ultimatum from the Zephyrian Empire. He gestured weakly toward the holographic display, still showing images of Earth. These humans, for all their peculiarities and rapid development, are still primitive. They have never encountered a civilization like ours. When they see the true power of the Empire, when one of our dreadnoughts appears in their sky, they will do what every other species has done. They will kneel. The debate that followed was intense but brief. Some councillors worried that humans might be different, that their apparent obsession with fighting superior forces might make them unpredictable. Others argued that no species could be crazy enough to fight the Empire when faced with certain destruction. When the vote was finally called, it was closer than anyone expected. 6 councillors voted for the protocol of final warning, 5 voted for immediate sterilization, and 1 abstained. By the narrowest margin in Imperial history, humanity had been granted one final chance to avoid extinction. As the councillors filed out of the chamber, none of them noticed the small smile playing on Elder Wonho's lips. In his 3,000 years of life, he had learned to trust in the predictability of intelligent species. Fear, he knew, was the most universal language in the galaxy, but perhaps for the first time in his long life, the ancient councillor was about to be proven wrong. Admiral Seojun stood on the command bridge of the most feared warship in galactic history. The Imperial dreadnought Sovereign's Will stretched 10 kilometers from bow to stern, its dark metal hull bristling with weapons that could reduce entire continents to ash in minutes. This wasn't just a spaceship. It was a flying city of destruction, home to 50,000 crew members and carrying enough firepower to crack planets in half. For the past 6 months, Seojun had been traveling toward this remote solar system, at the edge of the galaxy. The journey had given him plenty of time to study the intelligence reports about these strange creatures called humans. What he read both amused and concerned him. They seemed like children playing with dangerous toys, unaware of the true powers that ruled the cosmos. As the massive dreadnought dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, Seojun felt the familiar vibration through the ship's hull that indicated they had returned to normal space. The bridge crew immediately began scanning the system, their instruments probing every planet, moon, and asteroid for signs of technology or threat. "Admiral, we're detecting multiple artificial objects in orbit around the 3rd planet," reported Lieutenant Minji, his tactical officer. Her voice carried a note of surprise as she studied the readings flooding her screens. "Sir, they have a lot of satellites up there." Seojun walked over to examine her display. Hundreds of small objects circled the blue-green world, from tiny communication satellites to larger space stations. For a species that had only achieved spaceflight 67 rotations ago, humans had certainly been busy. "Begin passive scanning," he ordered. "I want to know everything about their defensive capabilities before we make our presence known." As the ship's powerful sensors swept across the solar system, alarms began chirping softly throughout the bridge. Minji's expression grew increasingly amazed as more data poured in. "Admiral, they know we're here," she announced, her voice filled with disbelief. "Their primitive detection arrays are tracking us. And, sir, they're not just tracking us. They're actively scanning us with everything they have." The main display screen filled with intercepted radio transmissions from Earth. Voices in dozens of languages were shouting over communication channels as humans across the planet realized they were no longer alone in the universe. Emergency broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Military frequencies buzzed with frantic activity. Seojun listened to the chaos with growing respect. Most species went completely silent when an Imperial dreadnought appeared in their system, paralyzed by terror at the sight of something so far beyond their comprehension. But these humans were different. Instead of hiding, they were actively studying his ship, trying to understand what they were facing. "At least they're not completely blind," he murmured approvingly. "What's their military response?" Minji checked her tactical displays. "They're moving everything they have, sir. Primitive spacecraft are launching from multiple locations. Their orbital weapons platforms are powering up. And Admiral—" She paused, double-checking her readings. "They're aiming everything directly at us." A smile crossed Seojun's scarred face. In his 40 years of military service, he had delivered ultimatums to dozens of species. Most immediately tried to surrender the moment they saw an Imperial warship. A few attempted to hide. But none had ever responded, by pointing every weapon they possessed directly at him. Through the massive viewports that dominated the forward section of the bridge, Seojun could see the small blue world that had caused such controversy in the Imperial Council. It looked so peaceful, so ordinary. Swirling white clouds covered blue oceans and brown continents. It was hard to believe that this innocent-looking planet was home to a species that had the entire empire concerned. "Position us between their planet and moon," he ordered. "Let them see what real power looks like." The Sovereign's will moved slowly through space, its massive bulk casting shadows across Earth's surface as it positioned itself in the planet's orbital space. The ship was so large that it blocked out a portion of the sun, creating an artificial eclipse visible from half the planet's surface. As they settled into position, Seojun watched the human response with growing fascination. Instead of the panic and despair he expected, he saw organized activity. Ships were launching, weapons were being repositioned, and communication traffic was increasing rather than decreasing. "Sir, they're evacuating their major cities," Minji reported. "But they're also mobilizing their military forces. I'm reading massive troop movements across all continents." Seojun nodded slowly. These humans were preparing for war, not surrender. Even facing a ship that could destroy their entire civilization, they were getting ready to fight. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, possibly both. "Open all communication channels," he commanded. "It's time to deliver the Empire's message." As the ship's powerful transmitters prepared to broadcast across every frequency humans used, Seojun took one last look at Earth. Something told him this wouldn't go the way the Imperial Council expected. These humans had already surprised him once by tracking his ship and pointing weapons at it. He had a feeling they were about to surprise him again. The moment Admiral Seojun activated the transmission, every electronic device on Earth capable of receiving signals suddenly crackled to life. Television sets in living rooms, radios in cars, smartphones in pockets, emergency broadcast systems in government buildings. Everything simultaneously carried the same message. The Empire's translation technology was so advanced that each person heard the words in their own native language, spoken in a voice that somehow conveyed absolute authority. In Seoul, factory worker Jin-woo was eating lunch when his radio suddenly went silent, then filled with an alien voice speaking perfect Korean. He dropped his chopsticks, staring at the device in disbelief. In New York, Dr. Hannah was reviewing patient files when every computer screen in the hospital displayed the same message in English. Nurses stopped mid-step in hallways, patients sat up in their beds, and the entire building fell into stunned silence. In Moscow, military commander Dmitry watched as his secure communication systems that were supposed to be impossible to hack, displayed the alien ultimatum in flawless Russian. His hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, though he knew it would be useless against a threat from space. The message was brief but devastating in its implications. Admiral Seojun's voice carried the weight of absolute power as he spoke. "Inhabitants of the Third World, I am Admiral Seojun of the Zephyrian Empire. Your species has been evaluated and found to possess dangerous potential." Across the globe, people stopped what they were doing and listened. Parents picked up children, families gathered around televisions, and world leaders rushed to emergency command centers. The phrase "dangerous potential" sent chills down human spines everywhere. It suggested that humanity had already been judged and found wanting, You will immediately cease all expansion beyond your natural satellite, the Admiral continued. The demand was crystal clear. Humans were to stop all space exploration beyond the Moon. No more missions to Mars, no more asteroid mining operations, no more dreams of reaching the stars. But the next demand was even more shocking. You will dismantle your nuclear arsenals. In a single sentence, the aliens were ordering humanity to give up their most powerful weapons. Nuclear deterrence had kept the world from major wars for decades, and now they were being told to throw it all away. The final requirement was perhaps the most ominous. You will prepare for integration into the Empire. The word integration sounded peaceful, but everyone who heard it understood the real meaning. Humanity was being told to prepare for conquest, to make the process of losing their freedom as easy as possible. You have 24 of your rotations to comply, Seojun announced. 24 hours. Less than a single day to make a decision that would determine the future of the entire human race. The transmission ended with words that would echo in human minds for generations. This warning will not be repeated. When the alien voice finally fell silent, Earth itself seemed to hold its breath. For several long minutes, the planet was quieter than it had been in centuries. No traffic moved, no planes flew, no factories operated. 7 billion people stood frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. Then the silence broke, like a dam bursting. In government buildings around the world, emergency phones began ringing simultaneously. The President of the United States was pulled from a meeting and rushed to a secure bunker. The leaders of China, Russia, India, and every other major nation were doing the same thing. For the first time in human history, every world leader was dealing with exactly the same crisis at exactly the same moment. Military bases across the globe went to maximum alert. Soldiers who had been performing routine duties suddenly found themselves preparing for a war against an enemy they couldn't fight. Air Force pilots stared at fighter jets that seemed like toys compared to the massive ship hanging in space above. Them scientists frantically analyzed the transmission, trying to understand the technology that could simultaneously broadcast to every device on Earth. The implications were terrifying. If the aliens could control human communications so easily, what else could they control? In homes and schools and workplaces, ordinary people struggled to comprehend that their world had changed forever. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Religious leaders tried to provide comfort in the face of the unthinkable. Philosophers debated whether humanity should fight or surrender. But perhaps most importantly, something began stirring in the human spirit that Admiral Seojun had not expected. Instead of the fear and despair that usually followed imperial ultimatums, a different emotion was taking hold. It started small, a factory worker in Seoul clenching his fists in anger, a doctor in New York refusing to accept that humanity's future was over, a commander in Moscow reaching for his secure phone to call allies instead of preparing surrender terms. Across the planet, 7 billion humans were beginning to realize that they had been threatened by something that considered them inferior. And throughout human history, there was one thing that had always united the species more than anything else: being told they couldn't do something. The Zephyrian Empire had just made the biggest mistake in its 10,000-year history. They had given humanity a common enemy. The hastily constructed Global Defense Council meeting room buzzed with nervous energy as world leaders gathered for the most important discussion in human history. Built in an underground bunker beneath Geneva, the facility had been completed just 8 hours after the alien ultimatum. Engineers, construction workers, and military personnel had worked around the clock to create a secure space where humanity's future could be decided. President Park Ji-hoon of the Korean Federation stood at the head of a massive oval table, looking at faces he had only seen on television screens and diplomatic summits. The President of the United States sat next to the Premier of China. The Chancellor of Germany was deep in conversation with the Prime Minister of India. Russian generals compared notes with Brazilian admirals. For the first time in centuries, humanity's leaders weren't arguing about borders, trade deals, or political differences. They were united by a single, overwhelming threat. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on President Park. Here he was, fair Korean leader, addressing the world about an ultimatum delivered by an alien admiral who happened to share a Korean name. The coincidence felt almost cosmic, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor about humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life. 16 hours ago, we received humanity's first communication from another intelligent species. Park began, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. And that communication was a threat. They've given us 24 hours to surrender our independence, dismantle our defenses, and prepare for conquest. Murmurs rippled around the table as leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of the decision ahead pressed down on everyone in the room like a physical force. They think we'll roll over because they have bigger ships, Park continued, his voice growing harder with each word. They believe that showing us their superior technology will make us surrender like frightened children. But I didn't become a leader by backing down from bullies, no matter how big they are. He gestured to Dr. Lee Hana, who had been working without sleep since the transmission ended. The brilliant physicist stood up, her clothes wrinkled and her hair disheveled, but her eyes burning with determination and scientific curiosity. Dr. Hana, what are our options? Park asked. Can we fight them? Dr. Hana activated the holographic projector in the center of the table, filling the air above them with three-dimensional images of the alien dreadnought. The massive ship rotated slowly, its weapons systems highlighted in red, its propulsion systems marked in blue, and its energy signatures displayed as flowing patterns of light. We've been analyzing their ship's energy signatures for the past 16 hours, she explained, manipulating the hologram to show different aspects of the alien vessel. Their technology is definitely advanced, probably centuries ahead of ours, in raw power and efficiency. But here's what's interesting. It follows predictable patterns. She zoomed in on the ship's weapon systems, showing how they were arranged in symmetrical patterns along the hull. Look at this design philosophy. Everything is organized, standardized, optimized for maximum efficiency. Their entire ship is built like a perfect machine. Every component has its designated place and function. General Kim Tae-hyung, South Korea's top military strategist, leaned forward with interest. What does that tell us about how they think? Dr. Hana's tired face broke into a cold smile that would have made her enemies shiver. They think like a bureaucracy, rigid, by the book, predictable. Their entire civilization has probably been following the same successful patterns for thousands of years. They've conquered so many worlds using the same methods that they can't imagine any other way of doing things. She manipulated the hologram again, this time showing human military equipment alongside the alien ship. Earth's weapons looked like toys in comparison, tiny missiles next to massive energy cannons, small fighter jets dwarfed by the alien vessel's bulk. But here's where it gets interesting, Dr. Hana continued. We've been monitoring their ship's behavior since it arrived. They positioned themselves exactly where their tactical manuals probably told them to, between Earth and the Moon, in a position that maximizes their psychological impact while maintaining optimal firing solutions. She paused, looking around. The table at the assembled world leaders. They're following a script, a very successful script that has probably worked on hundreds of other species. But there's one problem with their approach. What's that? Asked the President of the United States. Dr. Hana's smile grew wider and more dangerous. They're dealing with humans, and if there's one thing humans are famous for, it's not following scripts. She gestured to the assembled leaders around the table. Look at this room. 6 months ago, half of you were threatening to go to war with the other half. We've never agreed on anything. Not religion, not politics, not economics, not even what to call our planet. We fight over everything. General Kim nodded slowly, beginning to understand where she was going with this. And how do humans think? Dr. Hana, the physicist's expression became absolutely predatory. We think like chaos incarnate. We improvise, we adapt, we break rules that don't make sense, and we create solutions that shouldn't work but do anyway. Every major human advancement came from someone who refused to accept that something was impossible. She pulled up historical images, the Wright brothers' first flight, the moon landing, the development of the internet. They expect us to behave like every other species they've conquered, They expect fear, submission, and predictable responses to their show of force. Dr. Hana looked directly at President Park, her voice filled with quiet determination. What they don't expect is a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history fighting things bigger and stronger than itself, and winning. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity wasn't going to follow the alien script. They were about to write their own. Within hours of the Global Defense Council's decision to resist, something extraordinary began happening across Earth. It wasn't the organized military response that most species would have attempted. Instead, it was something the galaxy had never seen before. 7 billion individual human minds all working toward the same goal in their own chaotic, unpredictable ways. In Seoul, industrial engineer Soo-young was supposed to be evacuating with her family to the underground shelters. Instead, she stood in the middle of her factory floor, staring at the massive mining lasers used to cut through solid rock. These machines could slice through a mountain, but they were designed to be stationary, powered by the city's electrical grid. "What if we don't need to move the lasers?" she muttered to herself, her mind racing. "What if we move the power?" Working with a team of volunteers who had refused to evacuate, Soo-young began converting the mining equipment into something never intended by its designers. They stripped away safety systems, bypassed power regulators, and created portable fusion batteries that could power the lasers for exactly one shot each. Within 12 hours, Seoul had transformed from an industrial city into a fortress, bristling with improvised orbital defense weapons. Meanwhile, halfway around the world in Silicon Valley, programmer Junho was having an entirely different kind of breakthrough. He hadn't slept since the alien ultimatum, surviving on coffee and the kind of manic energy that came from knowing the fate of humanity might depend on his code. "They're scanning us constantly," he explained to his team of hackers, programmers and tech entrepreneurs who had gathered in his garage. "Every time their sensors sweep across our systems, they're creating a connection. And if there's a connection, there's a way in." Junho's idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to break into the alien ship's systems directly, he would hide a virus inside Earth's own technology. When the aliens scanned human systems, they would unknowingly download malicious code that would activate once it reached their computers. It was like offering a poisoned gift to an enemy. In orbit above Earth, Commander Yeji was turning the International Space Station into something its builders never imagined. The peaceful research facility was being transformed into a weapons platform using nothing but spare parts, scientific equipment, and pure human creativity. "We're not just fighting with what we have," she radioed to Mission Control. "We're fighting with what we can imagine." The space station's solar panels became electromagnetic pulse generators. The laboratory modules were converted into kinetic weapon launchers. Even the station's toilet waste processing system was modified to create a cloud of metallic debris that could blind enemy sensors. All across Earth, similar scenes were playing out. In Tokyo, robotics engineers were programming construction mechs to serve as space-based fighters. In London, chemistry students were creating new types of explosives using nothing but household materials and textbook knowledge. In Mumbai, software developers were teaching traffic control systems to coordinate orbital defenses. The most remarkable part wasn't what humans were building, it was how they were building it. Unlike the Empire's standardized, predictable technology, every human solution was different. Engineers in different cities were solving the same problems in completely unique ways, creating a defensive network that had no pattern, no central control, and no predictable weaknesses. General Jae-hyun, coordinating the global defense effort from his command bunker, watched the reports flowing in from around the world with a mixture of amazement and pride. Every few minutes another impossible solution would emerge from some unexpected corner of human civilization. "Sir, we're getting reports from every continent," his aide reported. "A teenager in Brazil has figured out how to turn smartphone networks into a distributed sensor array. A grandmother in Nigeria is teaching her entire village how to build electromagnetic pulse devices using microwave ovens. A group of artists in Paris has created camouflage systems that can hide our satellites from alien sensors." Jae-hyun nodded, understanding what he was witnessing. This wasn't just military preparation. This was humanity's chaotic, creative, impossible-to-predict nature being unleashed on a galactic scale. "They expect us to fight like them," he said, addressing his staff and the camera that was broadcasting. His words to military commanders around the world. "They expect big ships, formal battles, predictable tactics based on their own successful strategies." He gestured to the wall of monitors, showing the frantic activity happening across Earth. Welders turning construction equipment into weapons, programmers creating viruses in their bedrooms, scientists building impossible devices in university laboratories. "Instead, we're going to fight like humans. We're going to be unpredictable, chaotic, and completely insane by their standards. We're going to use weapons they've never seen, tactics they've never encountered, and strategies that shouldn't work but will anyway." As the deadline approached, Earth had become something unprecedented in galactic history. An entire planet turned into a weapon, not through centralized planning or advanced technology, but through the collective creativity of billions of individuals who refused to accept defeat. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their absolute refusal to fight fair. When the 24-hour deadline expired, Admiral Seogen expected to find Earth's leaders broadcasting their surrender across every communication channel. Instead, as the Sovereign's will approached the planet, his sensors began detecting something that made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. "Admiral?" Lieutenant Minji called out, her voice filled with confusion as she stared at her tactical displays. "The space around. Their planet, it's completely different from yesterday." Seojun moved to look at her screens, expecting to see the same scattered collection of primitive satellites and space stations they had observed during their first approach. What he saw, instead, defied every principle of military engineering he had learned in 4 decades of Imperial service. "Sir, they've turned their communications satellites into weapons platforms," Minji reported, her voice growing more incredulous with each word. "These devices that were broadcasting television signals yesterday are now armed with kinetic projectiles and electromagnetic pulse generators." The tactical display showed hundreds of objects that had been peaceful infrastructure just hours before, now bristling with improvised weapon systems. Communication relays had been converted into missile launchers. Weather monitoring satellites were equipped with high-energy lasers. Even the ancient Hubble telescope had been fitted with some kind of particle beam weapon. "They're using solar collector arrays as energy weapons," Minji continued, highlighting a cluster of objects that should have been power generation stations. "And, Admiral, how they've strapped engines to asteroids." Seojun blinked in disbelief. Through the viewports he could see massive chunks of rock and metal moving through space under their own power, heading directly toward his fleet. The humans had somehow attached propulsion systems to space debris, turning random asteroids into guided missiles the size of small moons. "This is impossible," he muttered. "No species converts their entire orbital infrastructure into weapons overnight. Where are their factories, their shipyards, their supply chains?" "Sir, I don't think they have centralized production," Minji replied, studying the energy signatures of the approaching threats. "These weapons all have different power sources, different designs, different materials. It's like every single device was built by a different team, using whatever they had available." As the Imperial fleet moved closer to Earth, the true scope of humanity's preparations became clear. The planet was surrounded by a maze of improvised defenses that followed no pattern, obeyed no standard doctrine, and made no logical sense from a military engineering perspective. Traditional satellites moved in unpredictable patterns, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons. Space stations that should have been defenseless research facilities were launching swarms of tiny attack drones. Even individual pieces of space junk had been weaponized, creating a cloud of deadly debris that could destroy Imperial ships through sheer numbers. "Admiral, they're hailing us," the communications officer reported. "Put them through," Seojun ordered, curious to hear humanity's final surrender. Instead of a plea for mercy, a calm human voice filled the bridge. "This is General Jae-hyun of Earth Defense Command. You have entered our solar system without permission and threatened our species with extinction. You have exactly 60 seconds to begin withdrawal, or we will demonstrate why that was a mistake. Seojun laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge. Demonstrate with what? Your primitive weapons against Imperial armor. 55 seconds, the human voice replied calmly. The battle that followed would be analyzed by military historians for centuries to come, not because of its scale or its outcome, but because it broke every rule of interstellar warfare that had existed for 10,000 years. Humans didn't fight to win in the traditional sense. They didn't try to destroy the Imperial fleet through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. Instead, they fought to make the Empire pay for every meter of space, every second of time, every drop of fuel and ammunition. Swarm tactics replaced formal battle lines. Instead of large ships engaging in predictable combat, thousands of tiny, human-built devices attacked from every direction simultaneously. Some were sophisticated drones, others were literally just explosive devices with basic guidance systems. Many were piloted by human volunteers who had no intention of returning home. Suicide runs became the norm rather than the exception. Human pilots would accelerate their improvised fighters to maximum speed and ram Imperial vessels, sacrificing themselves to damage systems worth more than entire planets. Each attack was small, but together they created a cumulative effect that overwhelmed the Empire's defenses. The weapons themselves defied classification. Humans had created devices that shouldn't exist, using scientific principles in ways that violated every safety protocol in the galaxy. They fired modified mining explosives as artillery shells. They used electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable Imperial systems but were powered by jury-rigged car batteries. They even launched attacks using weaponized industrial equipment that had been converted overnight. But perhaps most disturbing of all were the strategies that bordered on complete insanity. Humans would fake surrender to get close to Imperial ships, then detonate hidden explosives. They would use their own damaged vessels as decoys while launching surprise attacks from unexpected angles. They coordinated their forces using methods that changed constantly, making it impossible for Imperial tacticians to predict their next move. After 6 hours of the most chaotic battle in galactic history, the Sovereign's will was limping away from Earth, trailing atmosphere from dozens of hull breaches and with a third of its systems either damaged or completely offline. As Admiral Seojun watched the blue planet disappear behind them, he finally understood what the Empire was truly dealing with. These weren't just another primitive species to be conquered and absorbed. They were something entirely new in the galaxy, a civilization that refused to follow the established rules of warfare, diplomacy, or even basic survival instinct. 3. Days after the battle, Admiral Seojun stood before the holographic projections of the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Imperial Council chamber, usually filled with confident discussions about conquest and expansion, was eerily quiet as the councillors waited to hear his report about what should have been a simple surrender ceremony. Seojun's uniform was scorched and torn from the emergency repairs he had helped perform on his damaged ship. His face bore the exhaustion of someone who had witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare, diplomacy, and the nature of intelligent life itself. "Honored councillors," he began, his voice carrying none of its usual military confidence, "we have made a grave error in our assessment of the human species." The council members leaned forward, their various alien features expressing confusion and concern. Elder Councillor Wonho, who had confidently predicted human submission just days earlier, remained silent, but his ancient eyes showed the first flickers of doubt. "These humans didn't just refuse our warning," Seojun continued, the weight of revelation heavy in his voice. "They used it as a rallying cry. In the 24 hours we gave them to surrender, they transformed their entire civilization into a weapon pointed directly at us." He activated a holographic display showing the aftermath of the battle, the damaged sections of his supposedly invincible dreadnought, the scattered debris of Imperial fighter craft, and the energy readings that still made no sense to his tactical analysts. "We expected fear when they saw our ship. Instead, they immediately began studying our technology, looking for weaknesses, planning countermeasures. We expected despair when we delivered our ultimatum. Instead, they experienced something I've never seen before, a species-wide unity, forged in the fires of shared defiance. Councillor G1, her insectoid features twitching with agitation, interrupted. Admiral, you're describing the reaction of a single planet to imperial authority. Surely your fleet was sufficient to handle. Primitive resistance. Seojun's laugh was bitter and tired. Councillor, they don't fight to survive the way other species do. They fight to prove they cannot be conquered. Every tactical manual in the Imperial fleet became useless the moment the battle began. He manipulated the holographic display to show the chaotic swarm of human defenders that had surrounded Earth during the conflict. Look at this defense pattern. There is no pattern. Every weapon was different. Every tactic was improvised. Every strategy was invented in the moment. How do you fight an enemy that refuses to follow any rules? The display showed human fighters ramming Imperial vessels, satellites converted into kinetic weapons, and coordinated attacks launched by devices that had been household appliances just hours before. They are unlike any species we've encountered. In 10,000 years of expansion, Seojun continued, his voice growing stronger as he delivered the hardest truth of all. Individually, they are weak. Their bodies are fragile, their lifespans are short, their technology is primitive, but collectively, they are unstoppable. He paused, letting that contradiction sink in before continuing. Technologically inferior, yet tactically unpredictable. Physically weak, yet mentally unbreakable. We came expecting submission and found defiance. We offered them dominion and received a declaration of war. Elder Councillor Wonho finally spoke, his ancient voice barely. A whisper. Admiral, are you saying that our protocol of final warning has failed for the first time in 3 millennia? No, Honored Elder, Seojun replied. I'm saying it succeeded exactly as designed. We warned them of the consequences of resistance, and they chose to face those consequences anyway. But in doing so, they've shown us something that our empire forgot long ago. The Admiral looked directly at each council member, making sure his next words would be remembered for generations. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one with the biggest ships or the most advanced weapons. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who simply refuses to accept that they've lost. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in Imperial history, a species had not only rejected their authority, but had actually fought them to a standstill, using nothing but improvised weapons and sheer bloody-minded determination. The Empire now has 2 choices, Seojun concluded, his words carrying the weight of a decision that would reshape galactic civilization. We can accept these humans as equals and explore the possibility of alliance with a species that thinks unlike anyone else in the galaxy, or we can prepare for a conflict unlike any in our history. A war against an enemy that grows stronger with every challenge, more united with every threat, and more dangerous with every attempt to defeat them. He gestured toward the holographic image of Earth, still spinning peacefully in space despite the battle that had raged around it, because they've proven something that will spread to every species under Imperial rule once word gets out. They've shown that the Zephyrian Empire can be fought, that our ships can be damaged, that our authority can be challenged. The council chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications of his words sank in. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of galactic politics with nothing more than stubborn refusal to yield to superior force. For 10,000 years, the Empire had ruled through fear and the certainty of their own invincibility. Now, a single small planet had shattered that certainty forever. The age of unquestioned Imperial dominance was over. The age of humanity had begun.